making sure, am I making sure I'm off mute? Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the fourth webinar in our series on the societal benefits for North American Waterfowl Management Plan, or NAWAMP work. For those of you who joined us for our previous webinars in the series, we're glad you're back. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, we're glad you're here. I'm Diane Eggeman, and I'm the NAWAMP Integration Coordinator. I'm employed by Ducks Unlimited, Inc. in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I lead the NAWAMP Integration Steering Committee. This webinar series was developed and sponsored by the NAWAMP Integration Steering Committee and actually put together by a small group led by Dana Varner, the Rainwater Basin Joint Venture, and includes Rick Clausen of DJ Case and Associates, Dean Smith of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and me. We're supported logistically by DJ Case and Associates and really appreciate that. This webinar series is to help engage more people in our conservation efforts by way of understanding how society benefits from waterfowl management and conservation. We wanted to share experiences from folks who are doing waterfowl and wetlands work and have been able to gather and use information on societal benefits. Today's webinar is a bit different than our previous ones in that rather than looking at habitat conservation, it focuses on waterfowl population management through hunting regulations in an effort to benefit hunters, recognizing them as important NAWAMP stakeholders. The project is an innovative approach to hunting regulations. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rick for some tech talk for today's webinar, and then I'll come back and introduce our speakers.
Great, thank you, Dan. Just a quick reminder for those of you that are on the Zoom platform, that again, as Diane noted, it is being recorded today, and you can register for this and future webinars by going to the nawamp.org website. And if you aren't able to make it, for those of you that aren't able to make it, or you have colleagues that aren't able to make it, or you want to come back and watch it again, it will be posted there as well, and that link is there on the screen. Most folks should be in as a participant today, in which case you should be muted and no cameras available, but you can submit questions, and we'd like to hear what questions you have. Feel free to do that using the Q&A window down below. You see that on the bottom of your screen. Look for the Q&A icon there. You can submit questions, and then we'll circle back and make sure to address all of those at the end of the webinar. Beyond that, I'm standing by if there's any tech support issues. You can enter those through chat if anything comes up, but we greatly appreciate you being here today, and I'll turn it back over to Diane.
Thanks, Rick. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Jacob Bushaw of Nebraska Game and Parks Commission and Rocco Morano of South Dakota Department of Game, Fish, and Parks. Jacob started working as a waterfowl biologist with Nebraska Game and Parks last March. Then in November, he started focusing on the program you're going to hear about today. Jacob got his Bachelor of Science degree at Valley City State University and recently finished his master's work at Louisiana State University. His research involved drones and thermal imaging cameras for waterfowl breeding surveys. Jacob also was involved with the first hunt program at LSU, where he got interested in ways to involve new hunters. Rocco Morano has been doing management of waterfowl and their habitats for nearly 20 years. He has a BS and an MS from South Dakota State University. As part of his master's research in the early 2000s, he worked to increase efficiency of Canadian duck banding operations. Rocco spent about 4 years focused on wetland and grassland conservation and restoration in his positions with Pheasants Forever, and then with the South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks. Beginning in late 2010, Rocco took over as senior waterfowl biologist for South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks, where he serves as technical representative for both the Central Flyway Technical Committee and the Prairie Pothole Joint Venture. Rocco also develops and coordinates waterfowl and wetland-related research projects that are funded through South Dakota Game, Fish, and Parks. So with that introduction, I want to thank you all for being part of our webinar today. Handing off now to Jacob and Rocco.
So can everybody see my screen right now?
We're good.
Thank you guys for tuning in to listen to us today. As Diane said, we're going to be talking about the new two-tiered duck hunting regulations that are going to be happening in Nebraska and South Dakota this upcoming season. So it's pretty important to note that this is a co-opt project through the Nebraska Game and Parks, South Dakota Game Fish and Parks, and the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And through this presentation, it's going to be kind of two-parted. I'm going to start off talking about how we came up with the two-tier regulations and how we're going to be implementing it. And then Rocco is going to take over about halfway through and talk about our results from this first round of surveys we sent out to hunters. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen graphs like this before. This is depicting the number of active duck hunters from 1999 to 2018 in the Central Flyway. As you can see, we've been at a pretty steady decline. We see spikes here and there, but for the most part, we're losing hunters every year. What's most concerning about this is coinciding with the time of some of the highest duck numbers we've ever seen. So we should be seeing a slight increase in duck hunters and not a decrease. It gets even more noticeable when you start looking at federal duck stamp sales. So this is looking at duck stamp sales from 1934 to 2015. As you can see, from about 1970 on, we've lost about 44% of our federal duck stamp sales. That's a pretty large majority. And you can even see it when you look at individual states. So this is depicting Nebraska and South Dakota's number of active duck hunters from 1999 to 2019. And as you can see over that 20-year period, we've been at a relatively steady decline in hunters. In fact, we've lost about 52% of our duck hunters over this time, about 2.3% a year, which equates to about 552 hunters a year in South Dakota that we're losing, and 464 hunters a year in Nebraska that we're losing. So I'm sure some of you guys are sitting here thinking, you know, less competition, that's a good thing for me, right? Well, waterfowl hunting is actually such a major source of funding through the sale of licenses, the migratory bird stamp, the excise tax. The fact that we're losing all these hunters is not a good thing because a lot of these funds go straight back into conservation. In fact, Dr. Atiska and a few other people ran a study where they found that they sold about 600,000 fewer waterfowl stamps from 1955 to 1994, which attributes to a loss of about $126 million in revenue for conservation that could have been put towards habitat management, conservation, research funds. So losing these waterfowl hunters is equivalent to a huge loss in revenue, which is eventually going to come back to impact our duck hunting populations. So we started to try to figure out what are the barriers to participation and why are we losing these hunters? And we decided the best way to do that was to ask them. So we sent out a survey to Nebraska and South Dakota hunters and asked them to rank on a scale of 0 to 4, what were some of the biggest barriers they could get into for waterfowl hunting? And what we found was that we saw a lot of the major culprits we figured, land access being a big one for all waterfowl hunters, as well as the non-waterfowl hunters we sent it out to, anglers, big game users, combo users, and small game users. Not really surprisingly, the avid waterfowl hunters, which we clarify as people who hunted waterfowl 5 out of the last 5 years, found other hunters were a big aspect. They don't like a lot of pressure. But one thing we did find was that waterfowl identification was a factor for all parties involved, especially the non-waterfowl hunters. But we also had to look at what can we control as an agency. So when we broke this down farther, we looked at the ones we could control as an agency. We can control rules and regulations, waterfowl identification, the hunting skills, and land access. Now, we know land access is a big issue. We knew that moving forward, but it has a very high cost as an agency. And because of that, we can't have that large of a scale of application for it. But we're still working on it. We're still working on doing better land access work. But stuff like rules and regulations and waterfowl identification is something as an agency that we can control. It has a relatively low cost, and we can have a really large scale of application with it, as well as just something we've never tried before. So when we look at our typical daily bag limits in the Central Flyway, 6 ducks, 5 mallards, 2 of which can be hens, 3 wood ducks, 1 scaup, 2 redheads, 1 pintail, 2 canvasbacks, so on and so forth. There's a lot of rules and regulations that go into hunting ducks. And it can get extremely difficult, especially when you start throwing in hens of species. So pictured in the top left and top right are a hen scaup and a hen ringneck duck. They look very similar. One of them, you can only shoot 1, while one you can shoot 6. So people just getting into waterfowl hunting, this can be really intimidating for them, trying to distinguish between these 2 species. But what happens if we take out species identification as a factor? Well, we asked those same group of people, the waterfowl hunters and the non-waterfowl hunters, what would happen if we implemented a special permit that would allow them to have a smaller bag limit, but no species identification was required? Well, when we look at our waterfowl hunters, not surprisingly, the avid waterfowl hunters didn't really feel it. They said about 27% said they wouldn't they decrease their waterfowl hunting. 60% said they wouldn't really matter either way. Only 13% said that they would increase it. But when you look at your sporadic and dissociated waterfall hunters, sporadic being people who hunted waterfall 1 to 3 out of the last 5 years, and dissociated people who hunted waterfall but not in the last 5 years, almost 30% indicated that they would be more likely to participate in waterfall hunting. And this gets even more noted when you start looking at other types of outdoorsmen: anglers, big game hunters, combo users, and small game users. 19 to 32% indicated that they would be way more likely to increase their waterfall hunting, while only about 4 to 8% indicated that they would be less likely to get into waterfall hunting. But we also had to look at complex and simple hunting regulations. So the complex regulations we have right now, the 6 duck limit, all the species and sex requirements, don't really encourage people to get into waterfall hunting because of all these different restrictions. If you're already into it and a hunter, it's not as big of a deal. But for people trying to get into it, it can be really hard to get into it. But simpler regulations don't necessarily translate either, because we lose some hunting opportunity. We'd have to cut it from a 6 duck limit to a 3 duck limit in order to make these simpler regulations work. And some people just aren't happy with that. They want to continue with their 6 duck limit. So we needed to come up with a strategy that met both objectives, which is how we came up with the 2-tier duck hunting regulations. So just a brief outline, the 2-tier duck hunter regulations are a set of regulations that are going to be implemented this season that requires duck hunters to register between 2 tiers when they're signing up for their HIP number. Tier 1 will be a 6 duck a day limit with all species and sex restrictions in place, while Tier 2 will be a 3 duck a day limit, but there's not going to be any species or sex restrictions. They can go out and they can harvest 3 pintails, 3 canvasbacks, 3 redheads, 2 scaup, and a ringneck duck. The hope is that this is going to allow those people who were just getting into waterfall hunting but might not be comfortable with their waterfall identification to buy the licenses and the permits, be involved in the funding of conservation, and build up their identification skills as they go, while not taking out some of the old time duck hunters who are really set in their ways and want to continue with what we have. So our objectives for this project moving forward are pretty straightforward. We want to maintain or increase conservation support for waterfall hunting. Bottom line is we want to see more duck hunters. At the end of this 4-year study, we want to have seen an increase in duck hunters in Nebraska and South Dakota. We want to help assure waterfall hunting heritage. I want to be able to say that my grandchildren are going to be able to be duck hunters. The way we're going right now, I'm concerned that might not actually be the case. Hopefully this is the first step in the right direction of correcting that trend. We want to maintain a sustainable population of all ducks, which goes kind of right along with the next one, which is we want to increase funding for waterfall management and conservation. How do we help maintain a stable population of ducks? We need money for habitat conservation, management, research. Most of that funding comes through the sale of licenses and permits and waterfall stamps. So by bringing in more hunters, we get more money to help us maintain this population of ducks. We also want to figure out the best way of monitoring and keeping down the cost of this system during this 4 years. So if at the end of our 4 years, if other states decide to jump on board, we'll be able to say, okay, guys, this is what we found worked the best. This is how we cut out all these costs. And this is how we suggest you guys participate moving forward. So right now our plan is broken down into 3 major aspects: outreach, implementation, and evaluation. I'm going to go through each one of these kind of briefly and broadly for a couple of reasons. One, we're on kind of a time constraint. And 2, this being the first year of this study, all of this is kind of in the works still. We're trying to figure out the best way to outreach for people, for our implementation, for our evaluation. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about here today could be changed based on us figuring out different ways of doing stuff or better ways of implementing it and so on. So we're starting with outreach, which has actually already begun. We're currently working on getting the word out within our agencies. I'm working on a press release for the Nebraska Game and Parks, Nebraska Land Magazine, the Game, Fish, and Parks Conservation Digest. We're working on getting flyers ready to hand out at local shooting events and banquets. We're going to be doing podcasts with Delta Waterfall and Ducks Unlimited later in the year to help get the word out. Myself and Rocco just recently did presentations for our respective Wildlife Society meetings. So basically anything that we can come up with to do, we're doing to get the word out. We're also going to reach out to current hunters. So we're going to go back to all those people, the anglers, the small game hunters, the combo users, and the big game hunters. We're going to take anybody who bought a license for that within the last 5 years, and we're going to send them an email or a postcard or something, just letting them know that this 2-tier system is going to be happening this year, and that if they have ever been interested in waterfall hunting, this is going to be a great time for them to get into it. We're also going to work a lot with our current R3 programs, including first hunt programs and hunter safety courses. So incorporating this into the first hunt program, specifically the university first hunt programs, made a lot of sense, as these are people getting into conservation degrees, wildlife management degrees, but they're not hunters. This program design, it takes them through what hunting means for conservation and how much it actually supports it. It takes them through hunter safety courses, and it takes them out on their first duck hunt. Now, I sat with some people in Louisiana on their first hunt. We were at a little place outside of, boy, I can't remember where it was, but we were sitting and teal hunting. And I sat with these two girls, and they shot about 2 boxes of shells apiece and walked out with about 3 or 4 teal each. They had a great time, but they were really uncomfortable picking out what were teal and what weren't. So hopefully by implementing this system, we're going to allow these people to get out there and just enjoy their first hunt without having to throw extra worries on them about their identification skills. We're also going to work with hunter safety courses. This was kind of another logical one for us because these people are obviously already interested in getting into hunting, but these might be your big game hunters, or in Nebraska especially, turkey hunters who had no interest in getting into duck hunting because they weren't confident with their skills. But by targeting them at these courses and offering them this opportunity, they might decide to branch out and become hunters as well. But moving forward, it's really important that we make sure people know that this system is optional. Most of the feedback and pushback I've gotten from the public so far on this system comes from the fact that they seem to think this is going to be mandatory for them, that they're going to be required to join the 2-tier system and only shoot 3 ducks of any species. So it's really important moving forward that we make sure that these people know that this is going to be an optional system. And now we get into a little bit of our implementation. So it's going to begin this season, the 2021-22 hunting seasons in Nebraska and South Dakota. So this was the brainchild of Dr. Mark Rutiska back when he was the waterfowl programs coordinator here at Nebraska Game and Parks. So it made sense to start this in Nebraska. Now, Rocco was extremely interested in this in South Dakota, so he wanted to join as well. So we included them for the study. And it's going to continue for a minimum of 4 years. If after 4 years, we're starting to see an increase in duck hunters and we want to continue it, we'll have the option of extending it past those 4 years, as well as bringing other states into the fold. If states like Kansas or Iowa see that we're increasing our number of duck hunters every year because of this system, they'll have the option of joining it as well. And it's going to be incorporated using the current Harvest Information Program, or the HIP system. So I'm going to operate under the assumption most people in this group know what the HIP system is or are familiar with it. But it really made a sense for us to use this as far as pushing the system forward because it's already such a well-established system. It's been around since 1998. Most people who work with migratory birds are already familiar with the system, and it's connected to programs used to estimate harvest already. When you sign up for your HIP number, you have to say if you hunted ducks, and then you have to give us an estimate on how many you've harvested. So it didn't make sense for us to go through and reinvent the wheel, so to speak, and create our own system to do this when there was already such a well-established system that we could basically just adopt for our needs. And it also is going to strengthen the need for obtaining a HIP number. I helped a lot with Nebraska's Duck Slam this season. For those of you who don't know what that is, it was a competition we offered to duck hunters in Nebraska where they could shoot a Drake pintail, a Drake mallard, a Drake widgeon, and a blue or a green-winged teal, send the pictures into the Game and Parks along with their licensing information for a chance to win prizes and get a certificate and a pin stating that they completed the slam. Of the 118 completed slams we had this year, 10% of those people didn't have a HIP number when they sent in their information to us. That kind of blew my mind, considering the fact that they were submitting this information to the Game and Parks Department without realizing that they needed to have this HIP number. So hopefully by pushing forward with this program, we're going to strengthen the need for people to understand that they need to have this HIP number. Generally, when you sign up for your HIP number, it's issued as just an 8-digit number. This year, when you select it in Nebraska or South Dakota, it's going to be T1 followed by your 8-digit number, or T2 followed by your 8-digit number. T1 obviously means tier 1, T2 obviously means tier 2. This is just going to be an easier way for biologists and conservation officers in the field to determine who is using what system. So we're going to look at a little bit of our evaluation. We're going to look at 3 major factors: hunter opinions, hunter participation, and population rates of ducks and other waterfowl. So when we're doing our hunter opinions, we're going to be using pre and post evaluation surveys. We've already sent out one pre-evaluation survey, which Rocco is going to talk about a little bit more in depth later on in this presentation. But when we send out these post surveys, we're mainly going to be curious with hunters were they happy with the system? Are they going to use it again? Would they recommend it to other people? And if they weren't, what are the problems they had with this system? It's important we get these people involved because they're looking at this from a completely different angle than we are. They might come up with problems with this system that we never thought of, and something that we can come back and say, you know what, this was a really good idea. We should try to implement this moving forward. And hunters also just like it when we ask them their opinions. They like to feel like they're involved and they have some kind of a say in what's going on. So it made a lot of sense basically just to send this out and get their opinions back. We're also going to track hunter participation. This is basically what it came down to. We want to see an increase in duck hunters. So we're going to use some new mark recapture methodology on licensed purchasing data to determine the growth in each state of waterfowl hunters. We're then going to compare that with control states like North Dakota or Kansas or Iowa to see if we're seeing an increase in duck hunters and license sales in Nebraska and South Dakota that we're not seeing in these other states. Because again, at the end of the day, that's our main goal for this moving forward, is we want to see an increase in waterfowl hunters. One of the most common questions I get from people is wondering if we're going to have an impact on the species with restricted harvests. Are we going to harvest too many pintails, too many scaup, too many redheads, so on and so forth? So when I answer this question to people, first off, I tell them that we're going to track this a couple different ways. So each hunter in Tier 2 is going to be issued a harvest diary, similar to what the Fish and Wildlife Service already sends out. They're going to be issued either through the email or through the mail if they don't provide an email address. They're going to be asked to record their name, the demographic information, and then every day they go hunting, they're going to provide the date, the state, the county, and the number of birds that they harvested. This is just going to be a good way for us to track days in the field as well as harvest rates. So in addition to that, we're going to send a random sample of individuals signing up for Tier 2 a wing envelope similar to the parts collection survey data or the PCS data that we're already getting. So they're going to be asked to submit one wing from every duck that they harvest that season, put it in the envelope, again, record their name, their state, their county, and the date they shot it, and then send it back to us. This is going to allow us to get really accurate estimations on how many ducks of each species we're hiring and how many ducks of each sex we're hiring and the age classes of those ducks. So on top of that, we also did some work where we took parts collection survey data going back to 2010 for every year that three selected species, pintails, canvasbacks, and mallards, had a 2 bird a day bag limit. And we compared the number of bag limits that had 0 ducks, 1 duck, or 2 ducks. So this is looking at Nebraska. So 94% of bag limits in Nebraska didn't contain a single pintail. 99% didn't contain a single canvasback. 76% didn't contain a single female mallard. If we bump that all the way up to 2 birds, less than 1% of bag limits in Nebraska contain 2 pintails. No bag limit in Nebraska contained 2 canvasbacks, and only 4% contained 2 female mallards. And it looks similar in South Dakota. In South Dakota, only 87% of the bag limits didn't have a single pintail, 90% didn't have a single canvasback, and 76% didn't have a single mallard hen. If we bump that up to 2, only 2% had 2 pintails, less than 1% had 2 canvasbacks, and only 4% had 2 female mallards. So again, we're not expecting to see any impact based on our relatively small scale. But we also bumped this out and just went ahead and estimated the increase in harvest we're projecting for each state. So if we get 500 hunters that sign up for the 2-tier system in Nebraska, we're only expecting to see 5 additional pintails shot or 22 female mallards. In South Dakota, it would be 12 additional pintails, 3 canvasbacks, and 23 female mallards. If we bump that all the way up to 25 hunters using the 2-tier system, we're only expecting to see an additional 23 pintails shot or 108 female mallards. In South Dakota, it would be 61 pintails, 16 canvasbacks, and 117 mallards. So again, based on the limiting scale we're at, we're not expecting to see any impact on these populations with species restrictions. But we're going to have all this baseline data from these surveys anyway, just in case we are seeing it, and have data to provide to other states if they choose to join us after our 4 years, where we can say, this is what we saw with our harvest rates of these restricted species. This is probably what you can expect to see with yours as well. And then just some other frequently asked questions I get a lot. First off, this is going to be available to residents and non-residents. Anybody who wants to come to Nebraska and South Dakota and apply for the 2-tier HIP system will be able to. It's also going to be for youth hunters. Anybody under the age of 16 who wants to be involved in the 2-tier system will be able to as well. You're not going to be able to switch tiers during the season. So if you sign up for Tier 2, you are stuck with Tier 2 for that entire season. You can switch tiers between the seasons though. So if you spend 2 years using tier 2, and at the end of that second year, you're more comfortable with your duck identification and you want to switch to tier 1, you'll be able to do that before the start of the third hunting season. But you're not going to be required. If you want to stay in tier 2 for the entire 4 years of our project, you're more than welcome to. We're not going to require somebody to only spend 2 years and then graduate to tier 1. This is only going to be used under liberal or moderate seasons as determined by the Adaptive Harvest Management Plan. If they ever come back and say we're going to have to go to restricted season lengths and bag limits, we're going to scrap this during this 4 years and only take it up again when we're back to the moderate or liberal seasons. We're not expecting to see that happen because of our current population growth rates and graphs, but again, if it does happen, we're going to cut this season off. It's also not going to apply to goose or early teal season. So in Nebraska, we have a 2-week early teal season in September. If you sign up for tier 2, you're not going to be able to go out and shoot 3 wood ducks, even though I know a lot of people would like to. In South Dakota, they don't do an early teal season, but they do a bonus blue wing system. So for the first 2 weeks of the season, they're allowed to harvest their traditional 6 ducks plus an additional 2 blue wing teal. That's not going to be the case if you sign up for tier 2. You're only going to be able to harvest your 3 ducks. And we're not going to incorporate geese into this as well because there's not many people who struggle to identify giant Canada geese flying into your decoys. And lastly, is you're still going to be able to required to purchase all applicable licenses and permits. And we're not going to have discounted licenses for people using tier 2. If you want to hunt ducks in Nebraska, you're still going to have to buy your Nebraska hunting license, your Nebraska waterfall stamp, your Nebraska habitat stamp, your federal duck, have your HIP number. And this is going to be the same in South Dakota. We're not going to be cutting prices or requiring less licenses for people to join up with this system. So from here, I'm going to pass it over to Rocco, and he's going to talk about the first survey we sent out to hunters asking about their opinions of our current 2-tier system.
Thanks, Jacob. And I'm going to apologize in advance for any slight delays because Jacob's running the computer via Nebraska. So, last winter, as a run-up to this experiment starting in 2021, we wanted to get a handle on what our current duck hunters would think about it. And we wanted to kind of drill down on any of the issues that they may identify, or just their opinions and honestly potential that they would use it as well. So we wanted to drill down even further to see what those reasons were, if there was anything that we can do to kind of stop that opposition through information sharing and identifying the gaps of knowledge that did occur. And then also try to get an estimate on preliminary participation, because it's hard to get a handle on how many people that don't currently duck hunt might duck hunt, but we can get a handle on how many people that we know currently or have duck hunted in the past may participate if they tell us they will. And again, the big one here is to develop a proper messaging and help to fill in information gaps, understanding, because as Jacob said, we found out really fast that the number one issue that current and lapsed duck hunters thought of this after we surveyed them was that this was mandatory. They just didn't quite understand that there was 2 options. And I think likely adoption of this would be pretty high, or at least opposition would go down if folks just realize that they have their 2 choices and they can have traditional season if they want to. We're just giving an option to somebody else. And this was a kind of a hybrid electronic and mail survey, so we could check for non-response bias. So one of the first things we wanted to get to figure out is, can hunters currently comply and understand with current species-specific duck regulations? As you might assume, people said, yeah, I can identify ducks, I understand it, and I can comply. The issue, and it was really similar in the Dakotas, or in South Dakota and in Nebraska. We had over 80%, pushing 90%, saying that they could both understand regulations and comply. It gets a little more interesting when you actually ask them if they can identify ducks. So we asked, can you identify ducks both in flight and in hand? And there's a little bit of a disconnect if you can see this. So that 85 to 90% of people said that they can comply, but in South Dakota, over 30% of folks said that they had trouble identifying ducks in flight, and almost 10% said the same thing. So that's, pushing 40% of South Dakota duck hunters really have trouble complying by their own admission. So if in reality that comply rate would be closer to 60%, and pretty similar to with Nebraska, although I'm assuming as you go farther down the flyway, it's easier to comply because, for one thing, ducks are less brown. The farther north you get, in the early season, ducks are harder to identify for the vast majority of folks. They're not the nice pristine drakes that you might see down in Texas. So another big part of this experiment, at least in my mind, is the ability for an experienced duck hunter to take a novice or somebody that's uncomfortable duck hunting them with them, without having to worry about that novice hunter making a mistake. That's certainly an issue that's out there. I know, as waterfowl professionals, we have to be cognizant of that when we take people out. You have to make sure that they're not going to violate while you're there. And everybody that goes duck hunting with a novice has that same fear, really. So what I'm hoping is that this actually creates an opportunity for mentoring new hunters. And we asked them, how likely would you do that if they had this option for the person that you're taking? And a pretty decent number of folks said they would, pushing 20% of current duck hunters in South Dakota, slightly higher than that in Nebraska, said, yeah, if I had a guy or gal with me that could shoot 3 ducks of any sex or species, I would take them out. So. And then we also asked them, how likely or unlikely would you be to use the 3 duck a day limit? And this actually surprised both Mark Vertiska and I a lot. At least I think so. So of current and lapsed duck hunters, we had close to 10% in both states say they were very likely to use it, and close to and over 15% that they would somewhat likely use it. So if you just look at that in its entirety, you have roughly 20-25% of duck hunters that currently duck hunt that would consider using this regulation option. And to me, just in and of itself, if we can increase satisfaction and the fun factor for duck hunting for 20% of our duck hunters, that's a win. That's not just recruitment, that's retention and potentially reactivation of these folks. So to me, that really jumped out to me as a kind of an unintended benefit of this is we may have a lot of current duck hunters actually use this. And we also wanted to kind of get at potential opposition. So we wanted to get at some of these identity questions. What does it mean to be a duck hunter? And what jumps out at me with this is that we've done a really good job. Folks like me have done a really good job over the last 75 years drilling into people that they have to know their ducks. This is a paradigm that's been ingrained, and rightly so. There's certainly been a time when, duck hunter numbers weren't really an issue. We had a lot of duck hunters, and potential for perhaps more pressure on some of the populations of waterfowl. But if you look at this, that's where our messaging needs to be, is that, there's going to be more definitions of a duck hunter moving forward. We're hoping to get some more people into the fold. They're not going to know their ducks right away. I always use the analogy of how many sports or hobbies would somebody do if the first time you went out, let's take bowling. You go out and you have to be relatively proficient at it the first time you go out, and if you aren't, you get a ticket. I mean, that's kind of the reality of this. We also asked them if they think the 2-tier system will result in more support for wetland conservation. Not a lot of people honestly did. And I don't know if they quite internalized what that meant, but if it increases license sales and participation, and even just, political support from folks that after they've been out, have an appreciation for wetlands and waterfowl, it certainly will increase support for wetland conservation, but that's not really what we got here in the survey. And then we just flat out asked them, do you support the 2-tier bag limit? And, when I first looked at this, I'm like, wow, this doesn't look so good. But after you actually think about it a little bit, the unsure is 25%, no preference was roughly 20%. And then supporting is 20%. If I can get any issue in South Dakota duck hunting where only 30% of the people oppose me, that's not a bad thing. So we got the yeses, we can work on the unsures and the no preferences, and hopefully with better messaging, some of those no's would be in favor as well. And then again, we ask, how likely are you to use this yourself? And if we just take the very likelies, that's roughly 10% of our duck hunters, that's 2,500 hunters in Nebraska and 1,500 hunters in South Dakota. And that's not even our target audience. So no R3 program in either state can even come close to impacting that many hunters. The scale is so big that my hope is that it really does increase satisfaction and fun for those folks and bring some more folks into the fold of wetland and waterfowl conservation. And then our next steps, we're going to continue our comprehensive communication, outreach, and education program. Jacob and I are working on logistics for doing the hunter surveys, diaries, parts collection, and then things like this. We're reaching out to partners and different publics and trying to get the word out and gain support and acceptance. And any questions, please feel free to get a hold of Jacob and I. Yeah, love to talk about it further with anybody. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, guys. We have plenty of time for questions, and I'm sure we'll have many. Go ahead and write those into the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen there. If you click on that, box will come up and you can ask some questions. I already have a couple here. I think you may have basically answered these after they came in, but just to reiterate, I'll go ahead and ask. They're basically the same question. How does the tier system work on a special season like early teal? And will the 2 tiers be applicable during early teal season?
So yeah, Jacob, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So it's not going to be applicable during the early teal season in Nebraska or South Dakota. If you register for the 2-tier system, you're not going to be able to go out during Nebraska's early teal season and shoot 3 wood ducks. South Dakota doesn't have an early teal season. They do a bonus blue-wing teal, so you can shoot 2 additional blue-wing teal for the first 2 weeks of the season, but that's not going to apply if you register for tier 2. You're still only going to be able to harvest your 3 ducks.
Great. Thanks. So while we're waiting for more questions, I have a question. So when it comes to developing your messaging, it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of work with podcasts and magazine articles and stuff, but when you came up with your messaging, were there any keywords or key messages that you're trying to stick to or even avoid?
One of the big ones for me was just the original that we need to make sure people know this is an optional system. That seemed to be some of the biggest press back we got so far, was people seeming to think that this was going to be forced upon them, that they were going to have to do the 2nd tier with the 3 duck limit. It's really important moving forward with this that we make people know that this is not the case, that this is an option for them.
And for me, the other real big message that I try to hit with hunters is, everybody wants to be the last duck hunter, right? You don't want competition. You want all the ducks to yourselves. But what folks need to understand is how the North American model works. And it works through, conservation by hunters and the users providing funds through license sales, duck stamps, and excise taxes. So, that's the big message that I try to hit home with hunters if they push back saying we're just going to have a bunch of people out there competing with their resource, and that is a concern with folks, but we can't all be the last duck hunter.
Okay, another question. How will non-residents of South Dakota or Nebraska select a tier 1 or tier 2 strategy before traveling to the state to hunt?
So at least in South Dakota, a non-resident has to have a migratory bird certification, which is a HIP registry, and they will select either tier 1 or tier 2.
It'll be the same in South Dakota or in Nebraska.
Okay. How has law enforcement reacted to this new 2-tier system?
So go ahead.
So in South Dakota, I've actually been talking about this for 6 years now, at least, because Mark and I have been working on this proposal. And I think we've worked out most of the questions that law enforcement have had. To be quite honest, I've had very good comments and support from our internal law enforcement staff on this concept.
Everyone I've talked to in Nebraska has been the same way. They've been on board with this. Some people are concerned it's going to make it more difficult to determine, bag limits in the blinds, but law enforcement officers are already having that issue. They still have to determine if I go up to two people who are both with the traditional 6 duck limit and they've got 4 hen mallards in the blind, they still have to determine if each person shot 2 of them or if one person shot 4 and the other person didn't shoot any. So their job won't really change too much because they're already having the issues that some people seem to be bringing up for this.
Okay. Next question. Does your marketing strategy include non-traditional duck hunting outlets to make sure that you're reaching people that do not currently duck hunt?
Yeah, so yes, it does. We're planning on actually marketing and providing outreach to all hunters basically in South Dakota, Nebraska in one way or another. And I also assume that we're going to try to in some way reach to even the non-hunting public as well. We're developing this as we go right now, but the plan is right now, I think Jacob even talked about that during the presentation, that we're actually going to send direct mailing and direct emails to basically anybody that's held a license in South Dakota or Nebraska, so that they know that if they've ever had a concern or a trepidation from duck hunting based on IDing ducks, if that's one of the barriers that was keeping them back, that they're not going to have to worry about that for 4 years at least.
Okay. Will Nebraska now require non-resident hunting certification and selection for waterfowl hunting like South Dakota? Hence, a non-resident doesn't have guaranteed to hunt annually in Nebraska.
I think they have that backwards because South Dakota is the one where they don't have the opportunity to hunt unless they get drawn for it. Is that?
Yeah,
Is
I think
that
the
correct,
answer
or-
is no. I think, yeah, the answer is no, that Nebraska is not changing its non-resident hunting structure at all.
No, we're still going to allow anybody who wants to come buy a license in Nebraska to buy it. They'll just have the additional option of choosing tier 1 or tier 2.
Okay. So another question that I had was, most people will obviously buy their licenses and make this selection when they're online, kind of by themselves. What kind of explanation are you going to put on the website, or, have you been really careful about that wording and making that, short enough for people to understand, but also really explanatory?
So it's not live yet. We're still in development of making that. Right now, it'll go live in July and August, I believe, in each respective state. But yeah, we're gonna try to have it kind of a really straightforward option on there. And also, leading up to that, we're gonna have to have a pretty in-depth communications and education strategy just of what they need to do when they do register for HIP. And then, yeah, there's always gonna be some bumps in the road. We've already decided that this first year, we're gonna allow people to switch back, change their registration basically their first year if they didn't know about it, if the communications effort, if there was a gap there. But after that, I think things should be buttoned up and we should be good to go.
Okay. So another question, will in-person license vendors need training to make sure they know what they're selling to hunters? People that sell licenses are not hunters, not always hunters themselves, and could possibly select the incorrect tier or just not know the difference between tiers and not be able to explain the difference.
Yeah, that is going to be an issue. Whenever you have point of sale licenses, hopefully the folks ask them, but that happens even with the HIP registry in general. They don't ask the questions correctly. So then the good thing is that a very high percentage of our hunters do get their licenses online. And like I said, this first year, if there was a disconnect at the point of sale, they're going to be able to switch it in our licensing office by contacting us. So do you have anything to add to that, Jacob?
No, we're going to do everything we can to make sure everybody who is going to be selling licenses knows what's coming. But again, I think there's a big disconnect, which is probably where a lot of the people who didn't have their HIP numbers this year going forward, they bought it from a POS system where they didn't let them know that they needed to have it. So we're going to do everything we can to get the message out that this is what they need to have. Like Rocco said, this first year, there's probably going to be some discord just due to this being the first season, but we're going to do everything we can to get that on the right track.
Okay. Another question I have here, great initiative. This could definitely increase the number of hunters out there, but do you fear that it could lead to less educated hunters by removing the need to learn about species-specific differences?
Honestly, I think that's an objective. I mean, we want people out there that perhaps don't know their ducks, and that's the whole point, is trying to get folks out there appreciating the resource, having some fun, hopefully learning their ducks through time, and then becoming a duck hunter. Basically recruiting permanently as a duck hunter. Now they may never get proficient enough that they will want to be in the tier 1, but that's certainly my hope, is a lot of people will actually through time become more comfortable and then just want to be as proficient as possible and learn their ducks as they, there's no better way to learn your ducks than as you shoot them in the hand. So that's actually, that to me, that's the stated objective of this.
Okay, are you going to provide feedback about the study to the hunters who participated after the 4 years?
Yeah, there's actually going to, at the end of this, there's going to be a final report that will be publicly available. And I'm sure we will be definitely, hopefully, messaging how successful this has been. We're going to be telling folks how many people have done this, what the attitudes were of both hunters and of both the current hunters and the second tier participant.
Okay, another question, nice approach. Question, if the goal is to increase duck hunting, is South Dakota planning to make more tier 2 opportunities available for non-residents?
I would say absolutely not. I don't foresee very many non-residents selecting the second tier, to be honest. Most folks that travel to South Dakota are avids. Now, if they want to bring a buddy along and they both drew licenses, that's great. I think that's great. I don't think you're going to see very many people that with the state of, avids with the state of objective of coming trying to shoot 3 canvasbacks or something like that. Those opportunities just don't exist. And I don't think very many folks are going to limit themselves in that manner, but I guess we'll find out.
Okay. Any more questions? The window's empty right now. We have a few more minutes if anybody wants to submit some more questions. But just while we're waiting, I want to be clear that this is being recorded and the recording will be available on that NAWAMP website. So if you're watching this today and you think there's somebody who would be really interested in this, you're certainly welcome to share that link with them and watch the recording online. Also, we have another webinar planned here for March 24th, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Dr. Scott Manley is going to go ahead and do the webinar topic that we had planned a few weeks ago. We had to reschedule at the last minute there on rice stewardship partnerships. So please put that on your calendar for March 24th. I do have another comment here that we can go ahead and go over. I don't think your survey results about ability to comply versus ability to ID ducks on the wing or hand are as incompatible as you described. Compliance is also a function of the duck species they regularly encounter, coupled with assistance from their hunting partners.
I couldn't hear that. Assistance from what?
Their hunting partners.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that that's part of it, but I guess you just have to take the response at face value. If I think a lot of people in their mind think that they're more proficient at IDing ducks on the wing and in hand than they actually are. And so when you ask the question in 2 different ways, you get 2 different answers.
Okay, another question. With the Harvest Journal, could you include a best guess for the species harvested? That may be something that could help new hunters be more aware of harvested species if they want to move to the tier 1 eventually.
Jacob, you want to handle that one?
Sure. We absolutely could include a best guess where they can register what species they think each one of them is. That's part of the reason we're also going to be doing this PCS data where we ask them to send in the wings. So if we only get 500 people to sign up for this, we're going to send wing envelopes to every one of them and ask them to submit it anyway. So hopefully we get a better accurate representation of that data anyway. But yeah, we could absolutely incorporate that into our survey as well.
That's actually a really good idea. I hadn't thought about that. I like it.
Okay. You've shown that harvest of species with bag restrictions is likely going to be negligible, but how will this be addressed if more states adopt this tier 1 or tier 2 approach in the future? Could there be harvest impacts then?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the way I envision it, my guess is after 4 years, there's going to be, if we can show that we haven't had any, undue impact on populations and that we're recruiting some hunters, I think we'll probably be able to go operational on this in Nebraska and South Dakota. I think that the model will become, my guess is that it'll be kind of like when teal seasons expand, you would have to do an evaluation to kind of prove that your state can handle it. There's going to be some states where perhaps this isn't going to work. And just based on, bag makeup and number of hunters. But yeah, so my assumption is that other states would have to do an evaluation, but that's up to other folks.
Okay. No more questions left for now, but you guys are, I assume you welcome questions from anybody who would
Absolutely.
like to email
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
or contact you outside of this format. Sure. Okay, great. So really appreciate you guys doing this today. Again, put March 24th on your calendar. And if anybody has any ideas for future topics you'd like to see in this webinar series, we are certainly open to it and we'd love to hear your ideas. So thanks so much for attending and have a great weekend.